This conference will now be recorded.
All right. We're going to talk about inspections and we're going to try to impart how people are going to respond to inspections in this current market because it's a little different now. It used to be that you could get away with asking for a laundry list of things to be fixed, and nowadays the sellers are thinking, you know, if I don't fix them for you, I now know what is the most important thing to fix, so you just go away. I'm going to sell it to somebody else because the sellers are ruling in this market. So I think more now than ever, it is important that we are actually pointing out the issues to our potential buyers and asking them the question, would you buy this house if the seller didn't make any repairs? All right. So to ward off the evils, you're going to say things to the buyers such as they are only licensed to inspect. They are not licensed HVAC contractors unless they actually have the certification for mold. They're not allowed to use the term mold. They are not God. And I actually have that in my conversation with all my buyers, because some of these home inspectors preach to these buyers as though whatever they say is the Holy Scripture. I mean, that's the way they come across, which is really unfortunate because it makes my job more difficult when I bring in a licensed person that says, no, I understand why they thought this, but it was actually a shadow in the furnace. It's not a cracked heat exchanger. But trying to tell your buyer that after the home inspectors made a big deal about how it's going to kill you because it has a cracked heat exchanger, it's really hard to overcome it. So I like to preface the conversation when we're talking about home inspectors that keep in mind, they are just licensed to inspect, and not all home inspectors have a building background. They're not going to understand the structural components of a house other than what they were trained in school. Kind of like you when you got your real estate license, what they trained you in school didn't really prepare you to sell real estate. It's kind of the same thing. They're going to give these home inspectors things to look for, but not all home inspectors are as good as they should be, maybe. The other comment to have is everything can be fixed. It's a function of money. And right now, number 4 is probably the most powerful of all, because they're moving kind of quickly these days because of the multiple offer situation. And I think a lot of times taking money in lieu of doing repairs might be the right way to go. Trying to find the wood to make repairs to the deck has becoming increasingly more difficult as more people have done improvements to their home. So trying to get some of these repairs done in a timely fashion could be difficult. So it could be that you just take money in lieu, and then you can hire your own contractor, oversee the job, then you know who's doing the work, when they're doing the work, and the quality of the work. So I think understanding the costs incurred with having to make some of these repairs can be really beneficial to a buyer. Puts a little liability on you because they're going to look for you for guidance. And there's no reason why you can't go get some opinions and some estimates, but always get more than one estimate. Unless you truly know the service provider, it's a real sticky situation out there right now where people are taking advantage of some people. The other conversation on bullet point number 5, the sellers may have lived in this house for 10, 15, 20, 40 years. And the things that are going to come up in a home inspection report could be things that they didn't know about, or things that they've lived with comfortably and it never bothered them living in the house. So asking for some of those repairs is going to almost blindside some of these sellers. Like, I've lived here for 40 years. I've never had a problem with that. So that's, again, prefacing the buyer as to what to expect a seller to respond. Would you buy this house now knowing its defects and make the repairs yourself? That's really important today. I think it's, especially if you're in a multiple offer situation. I know there are realtors out there that are saying bid up the price so that we win and we're the first person in the door. We can always go back to the seller and beat them up later. Well, those days, you know, they may be history. I think the sellers are starting to figure out that maybe selling it for the highest price is not necessarily the best way to go. They're going to wind up with issues that the house doesn't appraise. They've been caught because they've negotiated the repairs up front, and so the buyer offers $5,000 over ask. Then they come back and nitpick all this little stuff. And the seller thinks, sure, I'll give them $3,500 towards prepays and closing costs in lieu of inspections because I'm still coming out ahead. I'm $1,500 over where I would have been had I sold it for full price. And then the house doesn't appraise. But they're already bound to give that $3,500 to the buyer because typically you negotiate the inspection before the appraisal happens. So I think savvy realtors are figuring it out, savvy sellers are figuring it out. And I think this number 6 is really important that you say to them, would you buy this house if the seller said, no, I'm not making any repairs? And with that being said, if the house doesn't appraise and you have negotiated $3,500 in repairs, it is most likely that the seller is going to want to renegotiate that. And that's a conversation you probably need to have with your buyer as well. Just because we've agreed on it right now, we still got to wait to see what happens with the appraisal because nowhere in the contract does it say the seller has to sell for the appraised value. So it's all frankly negotiable right up until the end. And I don't think people are having that conversation with their buyers either. Eva's going to speak. Hold on, please.
We bought it for $225. We did a home inspection. We got a foundation. And we asked for the repair. We did the offer $1,500. I rejected. And finally, we come out with $3,500. And the appraisal is come back exactly $225. And we get $3,500 paid from the closing.
Good. So Eva did exactly this on a deal with his, where they offered on a $225,000 house. They asked for how much? How much did you ask for in the beginning? I know, but in the home inspection repair request, you asked for $1,500? Oh, they offered $1,500 and they rejected twice and ended up with $3,500. Okay. And that's a really good point because a lot of times these sellers, they want to get it under contract. They don't want to put it back on the market because they may have another house they want to buy. So again, it goes back to having the communication, understanding the motivation between the buyer and the seller. You can kind of predict how this is going to fall into play. But being able to communicate with the other agent and knowing where that seller stands, because if they stand to lose the house that they have under contract, their motivation to negotiate with you on repairs might be stronger. All right, so it was inspected and you need to be able to talk intelligently about what the inspector notes in his report. So we're going to talk about these various things as we go through the presentation. Oftentimes they're going to talk about rafters and joists, and the rafter is what is in the attic and the joist is what you stand on. That was typically a floor joist. The collar tie is going to be in the attic. It typically holds the angled pieces of the roof together. Sometimes that is a piece of wood that goes from left to right and connects the two that form the upside down V to keep it from swaying and the weight load deflecting the, it puts pressure on those rafters and can cause those little swoops that you see in the roof. The ridge vent, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Crawl space. If the crawl space is wet, it can be an issue. I mean, today is a perfect example. If you're showing property today, you should always have something in your car that you can pull out to kneel on, open that crawl space hatch and look in there. You don't need to walk through it, but you should have a flashlight or use your camera phone or the flashlight on your phone and shine in there and see if you can't see whether or not it's taking on water. Wet crawl spaces are going to come up in a home inspection. It can be extremely expensive to fix. It's certainly a conversation to have with a buyer if they're looking at houses on crawl spaces, that it may not be wet today, but the likelihood of it being wet somewhere in the future is pretty strong. Whether your gutter gets clogged and it overflows and it creates water under there, it's going to create the potential for mold and wood rot. And having any water underneath your house is not a good thing. Radon. People are doing radon tests pretty much on every inspection that I'm seeing. It's typically about $850 minimum to install a radon mitigation system. If you have a basement and a crawl space, it can be upwards of $1,500 or more because they have to encapsulate that crawl space, lay out the vapor barrier, run it up the sides of the foundation wall, and then seal it to keep any of that radon gas from getting into the house. Easier to do in a poured concrete basement, not so easy in a crawl space, stone foundation, even concrete block foundation sometimes. We're going to talk about the stair step crack. We have photos of that and flashing. Grading, especially on a day like today, that's going to be an issue. It's going to come up in your home inspection report. Improper venting for the furnace or water heater, that causes a backdraft, and actually people can die from that if the carbon monoxide does not get out of the house and the house is closed up. It'll eventually put you to sleep and kill you. So it's important that you point out whether or not the venting is proper and whether or not it can be fixed, because sometimes the ceiling height doesn't allow the vent to be raised any higher than it is. We already talked about who can talk about mold. Only people certified in detecting mold may talk about mold. And we're going to talk about footers as we move forward. At the listing presentation, I think it's really important that you're talking about the home inspection process at the time you list the property, because you are going to have the conversation with the seller and remind them, yes, you've lived in this house and you probably think you know all the things that are wrong with it, but I guarantee you the home inspector is going to come up with something you're not aware of. And the buyers typically are going to want things fixed that are going to affect the safety of living in the property. And your house is not sold until it gets inspected. The things that you've lived here with over the last 40 years that were problems that you just accepted, you get to fix them now. Your house will never be in the better condition than the day you give it to the new buyer at possession. It's not sold until we negotiate inspections. So we're going to talk about the potential issues. You need to walk around the property, especially if the radar goes off, because they start saying, oh, the couch would fit perfectly on that wall. We can hang the TV here. They're physically or mentally moving in. This is when your super sleuth mode should kick in, and you're wandering around looking at the mechanicals, the structure, the grading, anything that you can identify from feet on the ground, you should be able to point out to a potential buyer, at least to diffuse the home inspection report when they get it, because the buyer should be able to say, oh yeah, Alexa already told me about that. She's pointed out these issues. It's not a big deal. We already knew that this was going to be on the report. And that helps get you through an inspection repair request, because some of these reports are 65 pages long, and when a buyer receives it, they're overwhelmed. They think the place is going to fall down. So it's really important that we help diffuse this by walking through the property at the beginning and pointing out things that are going to probably come up. The peeling paint, this is something that's going to affect your appraisal. Peeling paint is going to be red flagged in your FHA or VA appraisal. And in this particular market, who's to say the seller is going to scrape and paint where that peeling paint is? So do you want to set your buyer up to fail because you know they're going to go FHA? You know the peeling paint is going to be an issue. It might be worthy of having a conversation with a listing agent that says there's a pretty strong chance, not 100%, because all appraisers are different, that they're going to require that to be done. And if the seller says, I'm not doing it, then you might ask the listing agent if they'll allow the buyer or the buyer's representative to come in and scrape and paint it so that it passes the inspection and they can move forward to closing. There's a liability issue involved with that, so you have to be careful walking down that path. But sometimes there's other ways to get around some of these issues, and communication is key. The gutters, the downspout extensions, and grading, a lot of this stuff is pretty simple to fix. Again, cracked windows are going to come up in the FHA VA appraisal report. Mortar joints, any mason can go in there and fix mortar joints. It's not an expensive fix. And then, of course, anti-standards comes into play with the ceiling height. Is the space conforming or not? Does it have heat vents, which is going to come up in an FHA or VA appraisal? What kind of potential maintenance issues are there? If it's a frame house, they typically have to be painted every 5 to 7 years. Eva? Crawl space and roof on FHA appraisals for sure. The crawl space has to have a vapor barrier if it doesn't, or if it's not gravel. And the roof, it can't be in need of replacement. They're going to flag it, and they won't allow the loan to be processed without it. VA kicked it back because it wasn't enough height for somebody to crawl through? Wow. All right. A home warranty, you need to explain how that's going to work. I have preached in here for years that I think it's really important that you get a qualified HVAC contractor to inspect the furnace and the AC unit so that you have a receipt that it's been done prior to closing, that it is in good working order. Because if the home warranty is called in to make a repair on it, They are trained to say no. And if you can pull out that receipt and say, hey, it was in good working order, it's going to be harder for them to deny the claim and say that it was pre-existing. And that's what they're trained to do, to say that it was pre-existing. So when the buyers start talking about moving their furniture, that's when you start looking around for the issues, and you need to be very careful about making sure your house is going to qualify for FHA or VA. And I will say right now, in a multiple offer situation, if you're representing an FHA or VA buyer, it is more difficult than it has been in the past to get those contracts accepted, because realtors are savvy enough to know that just because you get through the inspection process, you don't know what the appraiser is going to come up with. And it's not just the simple things like the peeling paint, cracked window panes, vapor barriers, railings on staircases. They can come back and talk about the appliances needing to be worked on, a leaky faucet, grading issues, crawl space not being tall enough. You just don't know what they're going to come up with. So a lot of realtors are telling their sellers, pick the conventional loan, don't even look at the ones that are FHA or VA. That conversation needs to be had with your buyer today. Wow, that's crazy. I hadn't heard that one. An FHA appraiser required more insulation in the attic. That is a new VA, but it is a new requirement because they didn't used to have to do this back in the day when I started in the business. Now doing an FHA or VA appraisal requires the appraiser to get up into the scuttle of the attic and take a photo of it to prove they've looked at it. And the same with the crawl space. So back in the day, they just sort of ignored those things and were looking at the living space and the exterior. And now they are told they have to inspect the attic and the crawl space and the basements. All right, so this is a picture of a sump pump. And this, it's the first one, the first photo, because it's probably one of the most important things in the basement of the house. If the sump pump is not working, or it has a lot of age on it and probably is going to fail in the near future, on a rain like today, it could very well lead to a flooded basement. And if you see a house that has multiple sump pumps, you might want to ask questions about that. It could be that they have multiple, one because they had to add a radon mitigation system and they dig a hole in the basement for that. And that may be all that it is. But if it's truly multiple sump pumps all the way around the perimeter of the basement, they have some water intrusion issues and you probably want to know about it. If you see a sump pump with a backup battery hooked up to it, you know that it must have a lot of water intrusion because they're concerned about a power outage, and that way the sump pump would fail and your basement will flood. There are different brands of sump pumps. I would have replaced mine in my basement every 5 to 7 years in the last house I lived in. Some of them are warranted for 10 years or better. I highly suggest that you find out the age of a sump pump. I took a Sharpie and wrote the age of it on the PVC pipe so that it was in my face to know to replace it, to be proactive, because the last thing you want to do is get caught with a dead sump pump and then have to call your insurance company to fix your basement. This is a photo, and if you can see it, it's water damage. The white indicates the fact that there's a lot of water damage. It either turns kind of really dark black. You can see up in here, this is most likely water damage coming down the side there. It's turned this piece black. So this has started to rot. And the reason being is because they built this baseboard on the deck right up against the doors to the den of this house and didn't flash it. So they didn't run the water away from where the brick would meet the wood, and therefore the water just pooled right there and slowly dripped down into here and deteriorated the baseboard. So all this needed to be cut out and replaced. This is a baseline used to compare the reads on mold, which I thought was kind of interesting. Jerry Parker does a really nice job. He works with Environmental Solutions Group, and this is highlighted just showing that they did a spore count, and they use it from the outside, and they compare the count from the air on the exterior of the house to the interior. And the way it's typically done to do a very thorough one They do a swab outside. They do one in the lower level. They do one on the main level, the second floor, and sometimes even the attic. And they compare the spore samples on the mold report based on what it is from the exterior. You're going to see more and more mold pet tests being done. They're starting to push them a lot more. It used to be that the Solar Disclosure asked about pets because of allergies. Now they're leaning towards mold spores causing allergies, and because of the pandemic, you're going to have respiratory issues and things. So you're going to see that more air quality tests are being done in the city than ever before. This shows that it's slightly elevated. And at the end of this report, which is like 16 pages, it has the definitions of all of these various words that I can't pronounce. Slightly elevated here, and this, interestingly enough, was right near where that rotten wood was in the last slide I just showed you. This is the ridge vent, and this is, in my opinion, the better form of ventilation on a roof. It is truly a cap that allows the air to go through the attic and underneath the shingle and around. It only works properly if there is airflow coming in. So the air is sucked up in here because the heat pulls the air in as heat rises, and then it goes through here and it goes back out. And it's going to keep the air circulating in your attic, which is going to prolong the life of your shingle. So it's important that you have good ventilation on your roof system. There's your soffit vent. I showed a house a couple of months ago where when they painted all of the soffits, they painted right over all of the soffit vents, and they've been doing it for years. That was a house on Tanglewood. There was no ventilation in any of those soffit vents, so it was totally covered with paint all the way around. So it obviously had no ventilation in that house. This is an interesting concept, and a lot of the mass production builders were doing air handlers in the attic because it's a lot less expensive to run flexible ductwork through the attic and just cut holes in the ceilings to run your ductwork, rather than having to start from the basement and work up through the main floors of the house and build in around the ductwork as it goes from the first floor to the second floor. The problem with this is, one, that particular photo, and I'm sorry it's a little fuzzy, has no pan underneath it. So with an air conditioning unit and a condensation line, if that were to be clogged, then the water has nowhere to go but onto the floor of the attic, which invariably drips into the drywall ceiling below. So people will look up and they'll go, oh my gosh, we have a roof leak. Not necessarily. It could very well be that there's an air handler in the attic, and you can tell because you can see that the vents are all in the ceiling or on the walls at the top of the rooms, and it's pretty likely that you've got an air handler in the attic. So if that's the case, you want to make sure that there's a pan that sits underneath this to collect that water, and the proper way to do it is to install an alarm. If the water fills up in the pan, it'll shut the furnace down so that it's not making any more of that condensation. Right. It's very rare that they do it. The other problem is that heat rises. So if your furnace is in your attic and you're blowing heat from the attic down, it's really not working very well unless you've got something pulling the air from down below, sucking it in and then running it through the system. So it's important that you're looking at where the vents are, the ductwork pushing the air out and the vents pulling the air in. Okay. Oh wow, they put the air handler right above the master bedroom. No pan to catch the water. And $650,000 house. Yeah, it's not unusual. Gobs of tar is not considered flashing. This is a photo from a home inspection report. It is supposed to have flashing. This, by the way, is called a J channel. And I just sold a house that was missing the J channel. This is catching the water that comes off the vinyl. It goes into this channel and runs down here rather than the whole length of the roof line, having that water run up against the shingles. It should channel it and run it down here no differently than a gutter would. And this should be properly flashed. This is a new cap. He claims that it's incorrectly built. I showed this photo to my mason. He disagreed. But again, I go back to the home inspector told them it was incorrectly built. He actually had a contractor that was going to go over to make the repairs. He gave my buyers the name of his contractor. The prices the contractor quoted were outrageous. Thankfully, my buyers were smart enough to realize that, and we chose our own service providers and saved thousands and thousands of dollars. But this is brand new, and they covered all of the cracks. They put a brand new cap on top of the flue. They put this in here to keep the varmints out and the birds out. This is actually a really nice job. He just says that it's supposed to have a drip edge on there. I can't tell you if I've ever seen a chimney cap with a drip edge. Never. All right, and these photos are a result of water damage. And the funny part, I love this photo. They put all this concrete rather than tuck pointing the brick. They just covered the whole darn thing with mortar, but they didn't tuck any of the flashing into it. So the water just runs right down the side of the chimney into the house. This is a great photo where it's missing bricks, and this could be what that looked like before. It should be covered completely in concrete and then have that cap put on top of the flue. And this is a terracotta flue, which is typical of houses in the Highlands, Crescent Hill, older homes. Now they make them out of stainless steel. But if this gets wet and freezes, it's going to crack no differently than a pot on your porch. And this can cost tens of thousands of dollars to repair. We actually had one a few years ago where this cracked up and fell into the basement. Unfortunately, these are typically the vents for the furnace, so it fell into the body of the furnace. So not only did they have to buy a new furnace, they had to rebuild the chimney and put in a new flue. Very expensive. This is a photo showing you the difference between a gas furnace and an electric furnace. This one has two PVC vents, so this is going to be a high efficiency furnace. One of the PVC pipes is allowing the air to come in because you need air to burn the fuel. The more air you have, the more efficient it burns the gas. They can be 90% efficient all the way up to 100% efficient. You'll see Train 1000. That means it's 100% efficient furnace or AC unit. So it's burning off all of the energy, the fuel for it. This is the condensation line, that little white pipe there. And you can see the pan underneath here to collect the water in the event it would have a backup. This copper coil right here shows you that this heat exchanger has AC hooked up to it. That would be the coil for the AC line. Just for fun, that's an old gravity furnace. That was only from a few years ago. I saw that house. It was still in there. They actually added a gas line to it and a fan. Originally, these were meant to burn with coal, and they were gravity because there were no moving parts. You build a fire inside that door, the heat rises, and it just sends the warm air through all of these octopus legs, and that's how they heated the houses back in the day. If you go into a basement and you see a circular space on the concrete, you know it used to have a gravity furnace. This is a close-up of a water heater. It has a green approved sticker on it. The sticker is going to have a date. Do not get caught in the trap and assume that that's the date it was installed. If this house went through a home inspection, say a year ago, and the home inspector said it didn't have a sticker, they have the city come out, they inspect it, they say, yes, it was installed properly, they put a sticker on it. That water heater could have been 10 years old, but the sticker says it was inspected last year. It's not a year-old water heater, it's a 10-year-old water heater. So be very careful about relying on that as an install date. This is a gas line hooked up to a furnace. This little switch turns the fan motor on and off. This gas line is what is fueling this particular furnace. Over here, this gas line has no coil, no vent pipe, or no pipe, I'm sorry, not vent, but no pipe attached to the furnace. So this gas line was never attached to this furnace. This is in the attic. You can see the insulation. The homeowners had lived there for years. They didn't understand why the second floor never got very warm in the winter. It wasn't until they had the home inspection where the home inspector realized it had never been connected from the day it was built. So people ask me all the time, it was a brand new house, why should I have to have it inspected? There's your reason. I had one where they had not connected the flue from the top of the fireplace through the roof. So if somebody had built a fire in that fireplace in the living room, that would have just gone up into the attic and set the place on fire. So there are very serious issues that can be found in the event you have a home inspection on a brand new construction house. So absolutely, if it's brand new, make sure to have a home inspection. This is an example of termites. And this, interestingly enough, was in a condo development that has a termite monthly inspection on the condo paid by the condo association, and yet they never treated it for termites. This is some pretty serious damage where they've eaten the wood up all around the perimeter of the garage. These are the tunnels, the tubes that the termites climb through to get from the ground up into the wood. So luckily in this particular case, the homeowners association had to pay for the treatment of this. The sad part is, because as a condo owner, you own from the drywall in, the owner of this condo had to replace the drywall once they ripped it out to make all of these repairs. So it turned out to be costly for the homeowner as well. So another reason when you're buying a condo to be very careful about it and to ensure that they have some pest inspection in place. And it is probably prudent to have a termite inspection done on a condo for this very reason. Foundation issues, these are vertical cracks going through the brick. This is a bad one because you can see they caulked it and it reopened. So this would be evident that that one is still moving. That probably is going to require some sort of a pier. It may have a downspout that goes right near this, and so the water pools in the winter and causes it to expand and crack, which is causing the corner to move. This one has been filled and has not reopened. So this looks like they have fixed whatever the problem was. A stair step crack strictly goes through the mortar joints like that, not just vertical. The vertical is a much more severe case. If it's strong enough to move and crack the brick, that's a pretty significant movement. A settling crack is typically just when it goes through the mortar joints, and that's all, because the concrete will typically crack up a little bit. It's not as serious unless it's offset. Great picture of a before and after of a crawl space. I like these photos because it shows that these posts are actually sitting on concrete footers. We talked about footers in one of the first few slides. The footers are supposed to be made out of concrete. They are as wide and deep as an engineer has designed for the construction of the house. There are formulas to establish the width and the depth based on the load that they will be carrying. This has footers right down the main beam. This is the main beam of the house. And it has these posts sitting on footers, holding up the house and deflecting the weight of the entire house on this main beam. So you've got the exterior walls carrying in the weight, and then you've got these footers carrying the weight. Sad part is sometimes I see these sitting on dirt. Not only is it an invitation for termites to crawl up into those wood posts, they're going to rot. So it really needs to be sitting up off the ground, you know, on concrete or metal posts. But you got to put the metal posts up out of the dirt as well because they'll rust. So this picture shows that it had a radon test because not only did they put a vapor barrier on the ground, they ran it up the side of the wall and tucked it into the sill plate all the way around. So this is what the expense would be to make sure that the radon is not getting into the house. And then they'll put a sump pump and a fan in the ground to pump the radon from underneath the house and then to the outside. So in this particular picture, I put this one in because people typically don't remember to write in the rain barrel. This is personal property. If the seller were to take this with them and you didn't ask them to extend the downspout, this is what's going to happen. It's going to cause a great big puddle right against the foundation of the house. And typically, if you see water intrusion inside a property, more often than not, it's going to be close to a downspout. This downspout should have been extended at least 4 feet away from the property. That way it would eliminate all this water pooling around the foundation. This photo shows that they put the downspouts in the ground, which is typical in the Highlands, some houses in Crescent Hill. Back in the day, they used to do them in terracotta tile, which would eventually freeze and crack up, so you don't know where that water's going. Oftentimes, if this is gonna be a leaky basement, it's because there's a disconnect between this and where it was supposed to go under the ground. So now it just runs right down the side of the foundation and it'll find its way in. Water's the most destructive thing that can happen to a property, whether it's a roof leak, a foundation leak, a leaky pipe. Water causes more damage to a house than anything else. We've talked about this in the past. This is a copy and paste about Federal Pacific panels that have been deemed unsafe. Zinsco and Challenger panels and GTE also have been deemed unsafe. You can go to a website that basically talks about all of the unsafe panel boxes. Give the link to your buyer so that they're aware of it. But if I'm listing a house and I see that it has a Federal Pacific panel box, I'm talking to the seller about it. Expect it to be requested in a repair request to be replaced. It's deemed unsafe. The photo on the left shows that this is a gas water heater. It has this, which is your temperature control, and your pilot light, which is going to give you a heads up it's gas. This is your gas line, so you know it's a gas water heater. This also gives it away because it's vented. If this silver vent is missing and it just has the copper pipes, you know it's an electric furnace and it's not going to have a pilot light. This is a humidifier attached to a furnace. It has water running to it, which is going to put the humidity into the air, typically used in the winter. They don't last very long. This is going to be your intake so that you know the ductwork is taking the airflow here into the furnace, which would give you a heads up the furnace must be nearby to this. This is an alarm system. That's your thermostat. And this picture over here, it's running this humidifier. So you've got a separate control over here to run your humidifier. I'm not going to take time to look at that right now. I want to talk about repair requests. When you write the request, you need to be very specific with what you want done. I have heard horror stories where the entire inspection report is sent over. That's a bad thing to do. Your buyer just spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on an inspection report. Why would you freely just give it away? But you do need to take pictures of or make copies of the parts of the report that reflect the request that you're making. One, for clarity, so that when you've written out what the request is, it is explained by the home inspector for clarity for the listing agent and the seller to understand exactly what it is you want. And oftentimes these home inspections have photos, which makes it easier to identify just exactly what it is that you want. Send only the pages of the report that reflect the request, and then request that the repairs are done by a qualified contractor, because if you don't write that in, sometimes hairy homeowner thinks he can make these repairs himself. And there are times when I walk into a hairy homeowner house and it's like, there's no way we're asking for repairs in here, because even if Harry didn't do the repairs, he's going to find some fly-by-night guy to do the repairs, and it's going to be shoddy. So that would be the kind of time when you're looking around thinking, it's obvious the homeowner's done a lot of this stuff himself. We'll just take money in lieu because I want my guys in there to make these repairs. Then you need to make sure that you're getting receipts for the work completed, because you need to know who did the work, you need to know when the work was done, and you're hoping that they've itemized what the work is. All right, so can you ask the seller to evaluate the electrical system and repairs deemed necessary? You can, but the contract specifically states in the repair request section that all inspections are to be done by the buyer and paid for by the buyer. So there's lots of different ways you can look at this. You ask the seller to evaluate the electrical system, that's fine. I may have my electrician do it if I'm a listing agent, because my electrician might say, yeah, it's a Zinsco panel, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's been here for 30 years. It can be here another 30 years. And I give you a piece of paper that says so. But does the buyer really want a Zinsco panel? Can you ask for cash in lieu or reduce the purchase price? Thank you for coming, Alexa. Have a good day. Can you ask for the cash in lieu? This is tricky too, because we're having some listing agents say that it is going to be construed as an inducement if we give you cash instead of making the repairs. It's tricky because if you ask attorneys, some attorneys are going to say yes, it can be construed as that, and some attorneys are going to say if you already tried to negotiate a repair request, you've itemized what those things are, and then you say I want money in lieu. If you had to go to court, you're going to present that to a judge and say, look, these are legitimate things. Here's the home inspection report. Here are the things we requested. We negotiated. We decided whether it was a timing thing or we wanted the buyers to be able to choose their work, who was doing the work. Obviously, that's reasonable, and the judge will probably say, no, it's not an inducement. It's truly legit. They were asking these in lieu of repairs. The only time a cash in lieu is going to be an issue and be construed as an inducement is if the lender gets a hold of it. And some lenders, if you turn in the request for repairs or you turn in the paperwork that says cash in lieu, some lenders are going to actually look at the repair request, and if it says something about a leaky basement, they're not going to make the loan until that leak is fixed. So it's really important that you keep your repair request separate from a price reduction or changing the terms of the contract to say the seller will pay up to $3,500 of the buyer's prepaids and closing costs, never mentioning that you're doing that in lieu of repairs. So if you get into that situation and you're confused, be sure to reach out to Bill or to me or one of the managers so that we can help you walk you through that. But you do not want a lender to see your request for repairs. Now, some lenders will require looking at the seller disclosure, and I've actually had some lenders look at the seller disclosure and say, we can't lend on this until you fix X, Y, and Z. Again, it's a conversation you need to prepare your buyer. It seems to me that more often than not, the people that are requesting these things be fixed from a seller disclosure are national banks. And they have been training their lenders to be very careful to whom they are lending because they don't want to take these houses back and then have these issues that nobody ever fixed be a problem now for the bank, and they're going to have to fix them. So it's really important that you keep this separate. The attention to detail really matters. This is from November of 2019. You can see that they're using the old request form from GLAR. It's reflecting paragraph 17B. As you know, paragraph 10 is now the home inspection clause. It also, they scratched out removing the lead-based paint line. I don't even remember that being in there. And then for privity of contract, all receipts are supposed to have the buyer's name listed along with the seller's. They scratched that out. It's just very strange. So be very mindful of what form you're using. When is the disclosure updated? I thought this was very funny. All of these items are major defects and will need to be updated, seller's disclosure, for the buyer to approve. That was very interesting that that was a repair request. And again, from the same person who's reflecting paragraph 17. The buyer kicked it back and said, I'm sorry, the seller kicked it back and said the disclosure is complete, and there is a little misunderstanding on the definition of major defect. The windows require repair on the exterior and are painted shut, and he's calling this a major defect. Here's another example, another stupid thing. I love this, and I know some of you have already seen it. This was a real live request for repairs. And I love number 2. It says to repair the step support where the metal rod was loose and missing nut on disappearing stairway. To this day, I have no idea what that means. I thought it was hilarious. And 2-130 didn't say anything about that. And it was just a photo. It was very odd. Scrape and paint the windows on the left and right side of the house. Oops. Repair the handle on the kitchen cabinet, second top cabinet to the left of the sink. Repair the handle. I did it standing there. I took my fingernail and tightened the screw on the back side of it and tightened the handle down while I was standing there talking to the seller. bottom of the closet door scrape. You're not going to get away with that in this market, that's for sure. Replace the cracked glass in the family room. There's going to be cracked glass later in this as well. I love the third line. Replace the tiles at the entrance door with similar color. And it has to be done by a professional floor specialist. You're going to replace the tile with a similar color so they don't match. Who would want to look at that? I can't believe that a buyer would allow the realtor to ask for that. And explaining why we had to put the drain stop lever in the bath so it doesn't leak when you turn it on and can be used. Replace the light bulb in the half bath. You're not going to pull this off today, folks. I'm just telling you. Seller's going to laugh you right out the front door. The switch box. The buyer requests that the currently existing switch box be replaced with a modern approved switch box by a licensed electrical contractor. The present switch box is deemed unsafe and unreliable and potentially an electrical fire hazard. Like we needed an explanation. It was not called a switch box in the inspection report. It was called a panel box. And I believe in this particular case, it was a Federal Pacific, but I thought it was hilarious the way it was written. She goes on to say that we need to have a licensed electrician install the light bulbs in the family room. Install the switch on the dimmer. You're not going to pull this off today. My opinion is that if you receive a request for repairs, that you rewrite your response unless it's actually very well written and very specific. You never should cross out items on the original request. It should be rewritten. It should be rewritten for clarity. I would prefer to use the term qualified contractor than licensed because there are no such things as licensed masons or licensed roofers. Clarity is mandatory. You have to think past the repair. Will it cause more damage? Such as the windows are painted shut. I want all the windows open. Well, if I have to go in and chink all that old paint off the window, it's going to chip the paint on the sill and possibly the trim around the window. So I want to be specific. I want the windows unstuck, but anything that's been chipped or damaged needs to be sanded and repainted in the same color of the original trim. So again, you have to think past what the repair is making the repair going to cause any damage? We've had horrible issues where somebody says, I need the water leak fixed in the garage, and to do it, they have to cut out drywall to get into a pipe to fix the water leak, but nobody bothered to mention on the repair report to put the drywall back. So then the argument becomes, is that the same or better condition as the date of purchase? And you get into a war basically because you didn't request the drywall be replaced, and now you're saying it has to be in the same or better condition. Well, it would have been in the same condition had you not asked us to make the repair. It goes round and round. So clarity. Make the repair and think past it. What kind of damage could be caused? I don't want the drywall just replaced. I want the drywall professionally replaced and painted so that you can't tell that the repair was done to begin with. Clarify when the repairs are going to be done. It should be done prior to closing and prior to your walkthrough inspection, more importantly, so you can verify that it was done and that the receipts are there and that you can prove that the receipts have been paid so that you don't set your buyer up for mechanic's lien because the seller is going to walk away. You own the property now, but that lien goes with the property, not the seller, because the work was done on the property. Oftentimes sellers can make the repairs like changing light bulbs. I would be embarrassed personally if I asked a seller to change a light bulb for me. Your pet peeve should be having a buyer invest a lot of money on inspections and then having to terminate, especially if it's something you could have pointed out before the offer was made. Be super sleuth. Look around. If you have questions, take a photo of it and send it to me. I'm always glad to be stumped. I think it's hilarious when I find things that I have no idea what they are. You all are really good about doing that. Article 1 of the Code of Ethics says you're supposed to protect and promote the interest of your client. In my opinion, that is making sure you're not setting them up to fail. So be super sleuth and look around the property. When in doubt, always ask your broker for help. That is a pretty significant crack, and I'd be concerned. I am not going through ANSI standards of measurement today. Any questions on this? Are there any virtual people out there still? Yes. Nice to see you guys. Questions, comments? All right. Eva, you got anything to add?
Well,
Getting ready to review a repair request?
last time.
So Heva got a report back and the buyer said he wants to ask for everything and Heva says, you better sleep on it. So you're
Huh.
coming in to talk about it today. Good.
You kinda-
Let's
you
review
kinda-
it together. I typically will tell people that my report comes in the evening when my home inspector is in front of his computer. And so you make your list of what you're concerned about. I'm going to make my list of what I think we should be concerned about, and then we'll compare notes.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes a buyer is clueless about something that they think is really substantial when in
Mhm.
fact it's something that we could do ourselves, such as a switch plate cover or an open junction box. And it's a 50-cent part. My favorite is when they're missing a clip in the panel box and they talk about it being a safety issue because you could put your finger through it and electrocute yourself. It's a 50-cent part at the hardware store. It's not that easy. I mean, it's not that difficult to just plug in a missing plug in a panel box. So I really like the fact, I'm not going to tell them what to do. I want them to read the report. I want to see what they think is significant. And then invariably they'll miss something that's really significant. And I get to walk them through and explain to them why we really need to switch gears and not worry about the switch plate covers, but go over here and worry about the downspouts or some potential issue with the waistline or something like that. Questions from the virtual people?
Not a question, but I can say that I had that recently where I asked, they didn't ask for it, like the heating and air conditioning to be checked out. And you know what? They said, no, we're all right with that. Well, guess what? On closing day, air conditioner not working.
Right.
So, there was nothing I could really do. Thank God there was a home warranty in place, but it's things that they don't see that's important, and really it's a CYA too for yourself.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really,
And
really
again, I go
important.
back to if you're sitting down with your client, I love what he was doing. He's going to do it face to face with this guy. I want to talk to them, even if it's a Zoom meeting. You want to look at them face to face so that they understand what they're reading, understand what you're saying, they're nodding in agreement. And then if they say, no, I don't really want to spend the money on an HVAC inspection and the seller's not going to do it, make a note of it in your file folder that you had a conversation, because you don't want them to come back on you and say, well, you said.
Well, I added it. I added it into, I added it, and they came back in lieu of money, and even then, but they were all right with it, and there was nothing else. I just had to shut up at that point.
That's
So
right. There's only so
that's
much
all
we
I
can
could
do.
Yeah.
That's right. Anybody else? Again, anytime you have any questions or concerns, you want help writing the request for repair, you want my opinion on evaluating the inspection report, I am glad to do it. I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of home inspectors coming on board for whatever reason. Maybe they lost their job at Humana or whatever. I don't know, but I'm seeing more and more home inspectors coming in the game, and it concerns me that they don't really know what they're doing, and their delivery is such that they're preaching what they find, and it's not necessarily the truth. So you got to be really careful what you're doing. And again, I go back to, like we talked about on Wednesday, you need to be prompting the questions that your buyers are asking these home inspectors. They have to get up on the roof, or you get a roofer to do it. They have to crawl through the home, crawl space, or get somebody to do it. It is incumbent upon us to protect what they are buying and making sure that they're buying wisely. So if they refuse all of that and they hire some fly-by-night home inspector and you're concerned about it, suggest they get another opinion. Suggest, like Jane said, to go get the HVAC inspected by someone who's qualified, not just Joe Schmo. And if they say no, write it down in your file. Have them sign off on it that you had that conversation. And remind them, the inspection is only good the day of the inspection. Things are going to change tomorrow or the next day. A month from now, they're going to have a leaky basement and they're going to call you complaining about the home inspector. Things happen. Things change. And you just need to make sure you're having the conversation that they understand being a homeowner, stuff's gonna happen. Anybody else? All right, thank you all very much for joining me. We'll see you on Monday. We're gonna talk about KV Core on Monday. Have a good weekend. Call me if you need me.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.